Okay.
All right. Well,
Yeah.
here we are, Isabella, Rodrigo. Thank you so much. And I was just talking to Isabella a few minutes earlier. Today, we're going to be talking about the birth of the language flow architect. And I feel very honored and privileged to be here with Isabella and Rodrigo. And really, at least my goal today is to get as many questions as we can from our audience to make it as interactive as possible, because this is, for me at least, maybe I'm just too much of a nerd, but I think this is all really fascinating and beautiful, and at the same time terribly misunderstood. So if anything, my goal today is to be able to exemplify what we mean by that, so really illustrate that, and also spend some time talking about the impact of that, both right now for businesses and agencies and translators, and that what that opens up in the future. So
Okay, excellent. So everyone, let's give it a minute so that more people can join. But yeah, that gentleman was Gabriel Fairman, founder and CEO of BureauWorks, and is going to present today's gala webinar together with Rodrigo. Let me see if I got your name right.
Yes,
Rodrigo
right.
Demetrio. I don't know
Yes,
why I
yes,
said
yes, yes,
Rodrigo
perfect.
Demetrio, but it's Rodrigo Demetrio, is head of marketing at BureauWorks. So welcome both. So this is the last webinar for 2023. Just a few announcements before we start, while people are still logging in, I see. So last webinar of 2023. Next week, we're going to have a town hall for Gala members on December 6th. We're going to reflect on AI's breakout years. And of course, both Gabriel and Rodrigo are invited to join. The next webinar will be in January 18th, and we're going to talk about machine interpretation. But we still have a call for proposal open for our Valencia annual conference. It's the Soapbox call for proposals. My colleague Ali will post the link to the web page in the chat, so you can take a look. It closes on December 9th, and gentlemen, you're both invited to send a Soapbox session proposal if you want to discuss something controversial. And that's it for us. So I'm just going to leave the floor to you guys.
perfect. And yeah, and Isabella, by the way, that includes you too. I mean, I'd love to get your questions and input too, because I know I appreciate how knowledgeable you are. And I think one of the challenges that I think we have is like we're trying to create a conversation between people that come at it from very, very different angles, needs, worries, fears, right? I mean, I talk to translators who are worried about working with files outside their desktop. And so they're like, that's just an interesting idea, right? For me, if you ask me, my files are a lot safer in an AWS self-encrypted buckets with a separate key. That's the safest I can think of. And I know a lot of people who think their files are safe in a USB drive or a hard drive. So that's the kind of like paradigm shift that I think has been happening for a long time. But in our industry in particular, and I say this because, for instance, Rodrigo comes from the marketing field, the digital marketing field. Our industry, at least when I compare it to digital marketing, for instance, as an example, it's a little bit slower to adopt things and a little bit more afraid, and righteously so. So, when I talk to Rodrigo, he's a very tools-oriented person. So everything he thinks about, the first thing he thinks about, okay, what's the tool for that? How am I going to create? It's not even a process for that; it's a tool, and the tool comes before the process, right? So yeah, that's just the backdrop, I think, of the conversation. And I was telling you, and I think it's important to know too, I've grown over this year to really dislike the word AI, just because I think I love to use the word because I don't get to use it often, but it's become hackneyed, right? It's become overused and meaningless at the same time, and also negatively meaningful for a lot of people too. So what we want to show really is this idea of context-sensitive translation and interaction between translator and engine, right? And just to set the background, right, most of us are coming, at least my brain was definitely formatted from a syntactical perspective, right? So you have a translation memory and you have fuzzy matches, and those are governed by syntactical deviations from different sentences, and these syntactical deviations are measured by Levenstein edit distances, and that's the paradigm, right? Same thing, glossary, like you have a glossary and you have a potential, maybe you can have fuzzy matches in glossary, but it's the same idea, right? You're working with syntax, you're not working with semantics. And I like to spend a little bit of time thinking about that because the implications of working with semantics are huge, right? So just a very simple example, like if you translate the sentence, John went to the supermarket, and now you have the sentence, John has gone to the store. Syntactically, no match. Semantically, very similar. And what can you do with that? You know, when you operate semantically, it opens like this entire door of making associations that weren't possible through syntax, right? So that's how we've been looking at this idea of what can you do with a large language model, right? So we've never taken the approach of, oh, you can replace someone or you can make machine translation better. Our approach is you can fundamentally change the way people interact with an engine, right? And I think Rodrigo, we did a panel together at Lockworld, and I think Rodrigo illustrated it really well. And I'll let you, Rodrigo, explain your metaphor of how you see what we're doing.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. I love how Gala promote content in their webinars, and it's an honor to be here today. So yeah, this analogy essentially it's when we think about social media and when we compare social media with traditional media like television, radio, journal, newspaper. When we compare, for example, we can interact with these medias. Essentially, they basically it's one-way communication. They are broadcasting, they are sharing information. We are just absorbing all this information, and I like to compare this moment in our industry with that, because when we get all the output coming from the sources like machine translation, we can interact. We can say, oh, I didn't like it, can you adjust that? Can you change this word? Can you change the tone? Can you change? So and with social media like that, when a big company like Apple, Ford, GM, they post on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, you have tools how to interact with the brand and branding, and they are getting closer and closer with all these tools. I like this analogy because it's how I feel when I interact with AI, and mainly with ChatGPT and all these interface that we can interact with, and we can fine tune our their output. So yeah, yeah, it was that we mentioned at Lockworld.
Yeah, I really like the analogy, particularly because it carries, social media, I think, is a great illustration of the challenge we face. It has the potential of bringing people together, has the potential of wedging people apart, right? The tool, the technology in itself, in my opinion, is amazing. Like the fact that you can interact with content and people all over the world, 100%. What we do with it, I'm not particularly proud. So I really enjoy the metaphor because I think it really illustrates really clearly the burden that we as users have over the technology. And I think that's also the conundrum around the language flow architect, because what we're going to show is, when as a translator, like let's say if I'm working in a traditional translation memory terminology environment, I'm not a teacher. I'm at best, let's say I'm recording my translation somewhere, and only if the translation has a very, very similar match, then that's going to be fed again to me or someone else using that translation memory or the glossary and so on. And in this paradigm, because the semantic interaction is so much more subtle, every single commit of every single sentence is teaching the engine. And we'll show you exactly what we mean by that. But that changes the intellectual burden completely, right? It's like one thing is for me, it's the same thing as like, just to illustrate, right? It's one thing for me to write a book. The other thing is for me to teach how that book should be written. So it's very different intellectual burdens. And I think, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but I think what we're working on, in our opinion, opens a lot more questions than it creates answers. But that's beautiful. I mean, I think that's the beauty of doing something new. And I think what the other part is, like, I was talking yesterday at Slater, and I can't emphasize this enough. Like, as a translator, and I mean, my mother was a translator. I started my career as a translator in this industry. I actually love it. I have fun with the tech, and I don't feel replaced as a human. And maybe it's because I'm completely, like I said, in my, like, swallowed by my own echo chamber, but I do love it. I do have fun with it. And the productivity is a consequence of that fun. And I really, for instance, with MTP, machine translation post editing, I disliked it profoundly. I don't like to use the word hate, but I disliked it deeply. It's like a terrible experience for me. And this stuff I love. And I think I'll start sharing my screen, because I think,
yes, please.
I've been saying a lot of things, and it's going to be so much easier if we contextualize it visually. So here we go. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect.
We can actually see your card. Okay, that's better now.
Just a teaser. I have so this is BWX, but really what I want to jump into is I have a sample translation project that I have created here. I have a few languages that we can illustrate this in, right? So we can show examples in French, in Spanish, in Italian, Portuguese. I scratch most of these languages, but I think I can kind of illustrate what I mean. I'll start with Portuguese. That's my biggest comfort zone. So let's turn on the web preview. That's something that I like, I think, as well, because just like I'm doing now, I think visual context can be important. And by the way, our web preview doesn't require JavaScript or anything. Any web material, any web content, this can work with. And before I start translating, let me make sure also that I have learning terms enabled. I do now. And there's, I'll explain learning terms, but basically you can see here, BWX learning terms transforms translation by autonomously enriching glossaries through AI learning from translators. And I'm not going to read it fully because I don't want to bore everybody, but what's beautiful about learning terms is that it's capable of learning from linguistic choices without having to actually add a term to the glossary. So let's look at this example, right? We have many different things happening here in segment 5. We have the sentence translate twice as fast impeccably. That's our homepage title. We have a TM match coming from our translation feed here on the right. We have a machine translation feed coming from Microsoft. And there's already a difference, right? One is the machine translation is using the word rápido, which would back translate loosely to rapid. The TM match is using the idea of veloz, which coincides with the glossary, which is this idea, this looser, more abstract idea of speed. And then we also have here underneath the segment, this translation smells, which is a semantic verifier, saying the phrase duas vezes mais veloz translates to twice as fast, but in Portuguese it should be duas vezes mais rápido to correctly convey the meaning of speed in the context of the translation. So there are many different interactions happening, right? There's what we call context-sensitive translation is going to make sense of everything that's here, shown and not shown. So even like very low level syntactical matches, like 10%, 20% translation matches can be leveraged. The semantic analysis of this sentence can be leveraged. The glossary can be leveraged. And so the translator receives a feed that's curated, right? It's not like I don't have to reconcile between these three feeds. What I'm seeing here has been looked at by a language model, in this case, GPT 3.5, and has been analyzed as far as, okay, what makes most sense given this context? So GPT isn't translating at any moment. It's making decisions based on context, right? So let's say, as an example, I change this word from fast being veloz, let's say fast, and before I also had rápido in the machine translation. Do you have any good synonyms, Rodrigo, for fast?
Ágil.
Okay, yeah. Let's try it. Let's try that. So I added something different to the glossary. Now let's ask it to translate it again. And this is what's cool. It changed the sentence structure to now inject the term in the glossary. And again, ran the semantic analysis and is not happy with the translation because it is deviating from the English, right? As the author, I can, because now loosely agilmente would back translate to with more agility, right? Which is different from fast. As the translator, I have the full intellectual authorship to disagree, agree, override this, but I'm interacting now with the tool. So what basically I'm teaching the tool through the terms that I hard teach it, which are actual glossary terms. I'm teaching it through the terms that it's going to pick up on, and I'll show you how this happens when I commit a segment. We're going to learn terms. And I'm teaching it because also my translation memory inputs, they become amplified. I'm no longer just let's say writing to a database. Yes, that is happening, but I'm basically building context. And that's the key thing about the language flow architect, is that you're not just committing the segments, you're basically you're teaching the engine that this is the tone, this is the style, this is what you're looking for. So before I go on, I want to pause over here and ask Isabella if you have any questions about what I've explained so far.
I don't. I think it's pretty clear. Just to make sure, the translation smells are based on suggestions from ChatGPT, right?
Semantic evaluations.
Semantic evaluations. Okay.
Yes, correct.
Yeah. And
you can ask for suggestions as well, but that's different. Like the idea of the suggestion is then you're getting an alternative translation. And what I most like there is the explanation of why, what the rationale is. I mean, and again, that's the key thing. I love your question in a way, because I think a big thing is so many people are taught to get hung up on the idea of whether AI is accurate or inaccurate, good or bad, hallucinates or doesn't hallucinate. And I really think that in this particular application, that doesn't matter, because the point is the human is still the author. They're still making the decisions. They're just operating with a lot more depth as far as what they're teaching, and they're operating with more guideposts as far as information they're receiving. I mean, me as a translator, for instance, what I love is, let's say I tend to make silly mistakes over time. Like the longer I translate, the more silly mistakes I'm going to make. Like, let's say maybe I'm going to forget the word duas as an example. And maybe I'm going to misspell a word. Maybe I'm going to like perform like these little silly mistakes that happens. My eyes get tired right after a while. And knowing that I have a tool that can potentially pick up on this thing. So notice that before it has the picked up now on the mistranslation. And for me, that's very liberating, right? I feel less, it also picked up on a syntax error as well. So I love it because I feel like there's something that is preventing me from making silly mistakes. So I feel I can work faster. That's one thing. And the other thing is that I like the idea of teaching, because for me, editing is a much cooler idea than actually just typing, right? I like the idea of thinking about text and tone and style and all of that. But again, it's a matter of preference, right? I can see how people can feel like they're
it's a matter of preference, and based on what we've been saying for years about post editing, it's also there's also a psychological component, but maybe we shouldn't go into that, you know.
No, I think it's important for us to go into that, because I think the key the key thing for me, Isabella, is that, like I said, I as like when you're talking about like AI post editing, right? Let's say this would let's pre-translate this with machine translation, just as an example. And this is in Spanish, by the way. So let's pre-translate this with machine translation. And this is going to just simulate more what a machine, what an AI post editing would look like, right? So as a translator, I get all this stuff. It's already, the text is already there, and then I have to make changes over everything that I don't like. The engine isn't learning from me. So if I make a change, like let's say right now it's using the word tú in Spanish, which is informal. If I want to change this to usted, I'm going to have to go ahead and say traduce todo el contenido de usted. And then in however many segments that happens, I'm going to have to do that again and again and again. So for me, it's a mindless task. Doesn't value my intellectual capabilities, doesn't learn from me. That's why I don't like it. I mean, at all, right? And this, and I say this because, and I can show you here an example, particularly with this tú versus usted. So let's filter here with you in English. And right now, again, it's using te permitimos. Now let's say we want to make it more formal. It's picking up that it's a pronoun, and I say, I want to teach it. Now I want to use usted for you and not tú. So now I have, notice that I have like these two terms have been learned: translation, traducción, localization, localization. These are terms that were fed to the glossary, like the engine picked up that we're using these terms. Now, if I ask AI to translate this again, it's going to change le permitimos. So the beauty is I taught it once, usted. Now it knows that you should be used in the formal sense and not in the informal sense. So going back to our example here in Portuguese, what I love is that it's interacting with me. So I don't get like a pre-translated file. I get a blank file. And with every segment, there's learning taking place. But I'm going to hand it to you and see. I'd love to be challenged by you, Isabella. Tell me where tell me where the pain is with it.
I quite like, no, there's no pain. Absolutely. I'm fascinated by the whole system that you created, to be honest. So I'm actually hoping that people in the audience are going to raise their hands and we can open the microphone and have a more
that'd be amazing. I see that there's a lot of chat activity going on, and let's give it a pause and see if anybody wants to share anything. And again, I'd love to open the mic as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Just raise your hand and we'll open your microphones if you want to join the conversation. No, I'm fascinated by the whole system that you created, and I agree with you. It's fun to use. Probably, I'd like to get my hands dirty, to be honest, with this. And yeah, the only thing that I can think from a point of view of a former translator is how much translators like this. What's your experience? Because
it's a great question.
Translators like to have control of their own work, and training an engine, whether it's an empty engine, whether it's contributing to a large language model or whatever, it's something of an obstacle, I would say.
And it's very interesting you ask that question, Isabella, because I think it illustrates the contradiction that we're creating. And I like to openly embrace it because I don't like being hypocritical or naive. So this, even though I end up being both things, but this tech makes translators faster, 100%. Like, and not just 100%, like metaphorically, literally, you can work twice as fast. And even like right now, I'm in marketing content, and you can work twice as fast, like because of the learning component. Because it's not like it's not just enriched MT, right? It's contextualized, it's thinking, and so on. So like, let's say for instance, I go back here to the translate the TM match, and I can confirm it again, still picking up on the glossary terms mismatch. I go to the next, and then again, it learned this term that machine learning should be kept in English. It's trying to retain that. I can always change that, for instance, and retranslate. So I think we illustrated the learning part, right? Now you ask about translator satisfaction. So, and the key thing we notice,
if you have numbers about productivity.
But that's the thing, right? So we sell to freelance translators, agencies, and enterprise buyers. Though we sell to all of them, right? So what we notice is freelance translators, when they sign up for a plan and they get over the worries and fears and the preconceptions, they love it. They love it. The feedback is, I've never been more productive in my life. This is amazing. I don't know how I've translated without this, right? So it's even hard for them to go back to a traditional tool because it's so much faster and easier. But what's interesting is that same translator, when they're being forced to adopt this by a translation agency that buys the software from us, they hate it.
Okay.
Why? Because now it's the same translator, but the first translator, they're making more, right? Because let's say they can continue to bill their clients the same. The only thing is that they're going to produce twice as many words at the end of the month. Now, the second case, they're actually earning less because the agency is maybe paying them by post-edit distance or paying them by hour or whatever. And in that case, they may be making less or having to produce more words to reach the same level of income. And I think that is a deep, I honestly have no clue how to solve that problem in our space. And that's one of the things that we're trying to work on, is trying to have a better understanding of cognitive effort to produce translations. Because ultimately, in our opinion, right, we haven't been good about learning how to use MTP. If anything, I think we've been terrible about it, right? We usually, the idea of MTP is like, for the translator from the agency, really is, now you have to do the same amount of work for a lot less, basically, right? So that's what it means for the translator, whether they're paying them by hour or by edit distance. And the way we see it is, it's not the same amount of work because now you're teaching. You're no longer just translating. So in some respect, it's a work of higher intellectual order, which should be more compensated. B, it's about cognitive effort and success much more than it is about words, right? So just as an example, like let's say Rodrigo is a lot better editor than I am, and he'll look at this segment and say, yeah, this doesn't need any changes. I'm going to go ahead and confirm it. And maybe he's 100% right, and it's great. And I'm like, no, I want to change this to aprendizado de máquina, and I start typing here, and I start typing there, and let's say maybe my the way I used the engine now, for instance, like let's say I'm actually creating a discrepancy between whatever I commit to the TM and the learned term. And then let's say that may further confuse the engine. I may change things that are not necessary, and so on. So those are all things that need to be kept into account, right? It's not the tool, but how you use it, and then how you get paid for it. So ultimately, that's what I think drives satisfaction. It's do you feel is it a pleasant experience or not? Number one. Number two is, are you making more or less money because of it? So that's kind of how I would say that it works.
Yeah. Let's talk about terminology then. I'm just improvising here, by the way.
Oh yeah,
I was
that's what
planning
I'm doing
to
too.
be backstage actually, but if you want me, I'll go backstage. But
No. This is amazing.
So you say you can teach terminology. Okay, you showed an example that wasn't terminology, was just an adverb, but you can take a technical term and correct it and teach, let's say, the machine to use it. Great. And it doesn't end in the glossary. It doesn't end up in the glossary, or does it?
So we have two types of glossaries. This learned term glossary that was inferred automatically by the large language model, analyzing the sentences. And then we also have the traditional glossary. So where you're actually, so here, for instance, notice that it doesn't have the learned terms. And I actually hard taught it that Bureau works should not be translated. And this is a really cool example also why it's so much different than machine translation post-editing, right? Microsoft great engine, but it translated the company name as MT engines typically do. But because I had the glossary, the feed that the context sensitive feed that I got as a translator, that was fixed. So I don't have to fix that, right? So I can just confirm that.
So, so you basically have two term bases. One that is the, say, approved terms.
Yes.
And the other one is the one that you build up, and that can later on be approved and moved to the
you can move. Yeah, correct. You can move the learned terms into the approved terms. That's the idea.
Okay.
So
is it something that you can do with a couple of clicks, or do you need to export in, say, I don't know, TBX or whatever painful format?
No, it's not painful. You can do that in the glossary tab in BWX. So there's an entire and by the way, we're actually enriching this part a lot, but there is a glossary management part in BWX where you can take a look at the terms that you have in the glossary, and you can differentiate between terms that are learned or not learned and so on, and upgrade and downgrade terms as well.
No, it looks good to me. Okay.
But it is important to differentiate those two, because we place more emphasis as far as context. Like we treat it as a harder truth, that the hard taught terms and the soft learned terms. Because let's say if you're specifically giving the instruction that you don't want to translate something, or you want to translate something a given way, that's a harder guideline to follow than if it's like, for instance, here where the engine picked up that AI is being translated as IA in Portuguese.
Okay, excellent. I see a couple of questions. Let's see. I'm going to see whether I can open microphones. So, for example, Dragos. Dragos, would you like to talk? If you can open your microphone. Okay, go ahead. Hi, welcome.
Hi, thank you, and thank you for the demo as well. Super interesting. I was just wondering, picking up on the terminology topic, whether your prompt in the background also allows for banned or deprecated terms that are listed as such in the term base, to say, okay, don't use this in the output.
Sure. Yeah, you can, when you label a term as forbidden, for instance, here, it'll understand that term is forbidden, for instance, and banned, or a DNT, for instance, as well. So yeah, you can configure it as necessary at the term level.
Super nice. And sorry if I missed this earlier. So you're also sending along fuzzy matches, or not necessarily?
Yeah. Not just fuzzy matches. So we're able to search for like just as an example here, like let's say I click on this segment, right? This is a context match, for instance, But typically, like when you go into like a project setting, just as an example, let me just show you. So let's take a look here at translation settings, right? You can choose the thresholds that you use from machine translation, both so like you can choose to see very low threshold machine translation scores, but typically, you start getting garble if you go below a certain threshold. The beauty of it is that the models that we work with, they can process like very low level syntactically similar matches, so like 10%, 5% matches, and still learn something valuable from them. So even though they're not going to be displayed at the UI, but the model can still learn from them. And then not only that, but we can also search semantically across segments as well, which is more similar to like a concordance operation that you would perform as a translator, but that's all happening in the background. So let's say what's displayed here is only a part of the context that's being leveraged.
And you don't put a limit on how many TM matches, because if you set it at 10%, presumably you might have a ton. So you don't say, okay, I don't know, top 5, or you just
no, I think our machine learning engineering takes ranks and considers, like, if you have, like, in a scenario where you do have over, let's say, maybe 30, 40 matches, we do rank them and we do consider the most relevant ones. Yeah, 100%.
Super.
Otherwise, it's too much. That's part of the challenge that we face building this, is that we're always wrestling with the key driving concept is what's the minimum amount of context that will produce the best possible results, because the more context you provide, the slower it gets and the more expensive it gets, and too little context and it starts to get not effective as well. So that's something we're always learning from and playing with. But yeah, great questions.
Thank you. Can I be one last question, please?
Of course not. This is amazing. Really nice
I'll
to hear
be
from you.
Royal. Now I'm gonna be annoying, so
It's all good.
I'm gonna be one of those persons that's go like, "Wow, amazing product. Could we have another feature, please?" No, but I'm just wondering, because I work for the University of Vienna, and we're doing some studies where we're looking at post editing, but also revision. When the linguist can also listen to the source and the target segments. And, in some cases actually helps to pick up those really subtle errors that kind of sneak in. So I'm wondering, is there any scope perhaps to add a speech synthesis function for segments at segment level?
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that. That's something that our CTO was talking about a few weeks ago with us, like his intent in adding this. So yeah, it's definitely on our radar. We haven't prioritized it, but I agree with you. I think that, like, being able to hear a sentence, for instance, really changes how you perceive things. And I think that what I love about your question, Rose, is that it goes to the heart of what we're trying to do, right? It's really creating an augmented environment. So if you're able to use more senses than just visual senses, if you're able to hear, if you're able to see things from different perspectives, gain different vantage points, that tends to provide a lot of insight, right? And that's kind of how we're looking at it. So how do we get better, not just faster, but how do we get deeper insights as far as what's being translated and how? So yeah, I think it's a great suggestion, by the way.
Cool, thank you. I think I'm going to send some LinkedIn invites. Cool, thanks again. And sorry for taking so much time.
No, our pleasure.
It's wonderful that people are joining, actually. There's another question from, let's see, Anan. I'm going to open microphone. Let's see. Hi, Anan. If you want, you can talk directly to Gabriel. Otherwise, I'll ask the questions for you.
Okay, hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you for the wonderful demo and the wonderful tool as well. I don't know if I have missed that or not. I was just asking if it is supporting Arabic or not.
Yes, 100%. Yeah. So let's create a project here. Super simple to create a project once you have PWX set up, Right now, for instance, my template languages are these, but we can definitely add Arabic. Any particular region that you'd like to see?
Maybe Egypt, yes.
Okay, let's take a look at Egypt. And let's add just a contact person. And here we go. Move a workflow. Okay, so we created the project, and here's the work unit English into Arabic Egypt. Let's open it up. And let me enable the web preview. So yeah, same ideas. It's trying to learn from the EMT, trying to improve the feed where possible. You can ask it for alternative suggestions. You can ask it to proofread for you. It can evaluate different opportunities as well. But yeah, it's same principle in Arabic as it is in other languages. You can take a look at the preview as well, and yeah, same basic principle. It'll work similarly in most languages.
Okay, and I was wondering, can it contact or يعني, look into other glossaries than the ones already in the memory? يعني external glossaries? Because surprisingly, I was just attending a demo about word scope yesterday. I don't know if you have heard about. And I was really amazed by the idea that you can search for a word in other glossaries outside the tool, and as well as the Wikipedia, for example. You can even search for a definition on Wikipedia. Is it available also here or not?
No, and for a reason. So the idea is we're already referencing a very large amount of content, right? In our paradigm, let's say what you decide to teach it at the basically, like when you create an account, right? You can, with BWX, you can create any number of glossaries, and every glossary is not just a reference mechanism, it's a teaching mechanism. It's a very important context that's going to be followed by the tool. If we begin opening this to further context, we're actually going to disorient the system as opposed to further orient and align the system. Like the goal is to create a feed that's very aligned to your preferences. So if we open that up to more preferences, we end up creating noise instead of music, and our goal is to create music. But I can see how it can be appealing from an idea perspective. From our application perspective, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to us. One thing we are working on, though, is being able to add and notice here, for instance, I don't know if this is correct or not, but it's the translation smells is picking up the phrase post AI translated as this, which means that, and saying it's incorrect because anyway, it works, and you can configure this also if you want to see the smells in the target language. That's possible. You can enable and disable any of these features at any time in the editor. But I think one thing of what I really like about what you're saying is the idea of being able to work with a broader context imperceptibly. So for instance, one thing we are working on is being able to create let's say, your translation process to an external website as reference, and have that create a runtime context memory for you. So that's something that we find very useful, because sometimes you're working for a client and you want to, let's say, maintain the tone of a specific blog or a specific page, and I think that can be very useful.
What I like most about your tool, that at the end it will be very customer oriented, يعني, because at the end it will be mimicking me.
Yes,
not
that's
just
the idea.
giving me any other reference or any other solution that is already available for everybody else.
Correct. Yeah, the beauty of it is exactly what you described. It is typically, right, if you want to train and tune a machine translation engine, super expensive. It doesn't get that much better. And then over time, it loses that alignment that you've created initially, unless you continuously train it and train it and train it. And even then, the results are all over the place. With this is exactly as you mentioned, it creates an engine that's personal to you. And you can create as many engines as you want, because what it's learning from is from your glossaries and TMs. So like, let's say, as an example here with the glossaries, like, let's say you choose to put everything together in a single glossary and a single TM. Okay, that's one way of working with it. But you can be hyper specific about how you work. So it's like, let's say, oh, for this client, I'm super informal and I want to create an informal glossary and an informal TM. And for this client, I'm super formal, or for this client, I like to use this. It's not the glossary, instead of just being like, it's like a list of terms, it's actually guiding and aligning the feeds exactly to you. So you can create multiple personalized engines as part of your experience in BWX. That's what I find so appealing, because in my opinion, like, translators, they not only are they very different from one another, but even like when I translate, I have very different hats that I put on sometimes, depending on the text that I'm looking at. And I love to be able to be in control over that. So, but great questions.
And I really like that it will keep the translator's identity and style. Yani, at the end, people will find out that this is that person's translation, not just something that is got from a machine translation, and that's it.
Correct. And that's the key thing. The cornerstone of what we're trying to, of the challenges that we're trying to solve is, if we're not, and that's what I think we did so poorly with MTPE, right? It's, you're actually removing authorship from the translator when all they can do is fix mistakes for very little pay. But in this case, because the engine is learning from you and because you're teaching it, it gets more and more aligned with how you translate over time. So the authorship, the agency, it gets not just preserved, but enhanced. That's the idea behind it. And that's, in our opinion, we really want to be able to help create a world where there's still value placed in the art of translation. And in my perspective, personally, the only way to do that, if it becomes also productive enough to be meeting business needs, right? And if it's just art and slow and expensive, eventually people will find a cheaper alternative, even if it's, let's say, worse, as long as it's good enough. And we're trying to find a place, no, let's make it better, and let's make it also more effective and quick as well. So yeah, I have to agree with your observations.
Right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anan. Thank you, Anan.
Thank
And I
you.
see there's another question, Mobiko. Let's see. Do you guys, I know this is a group of people, do you guys want to talk directly with Gabriel and Rodrigo? Otherwise, yeah, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me well?
Yes.
Super.
So, Gabriel, I just want to have one question only. We are an LSP based in South Korea, and we have a lot of TB and TM to leverage. So I just wonder if the BWX can leverage that kind of TM and TB that we currently have. For example, we often use TMX or SDL, TB, and TM.
Perfect. Yeah. As long as the glossary, as long as it's TBX format, you can import as many glossaries as you'd like. And TM, same thing. As long as the TM is in TMX format, you can upload as many TMs as you'd like as well. So yeah, 100%. TBX, TMX, 100% compatible.
Okay. One more thing, please. What about the file formats that are supported by the BWX?
Yeah, great question. Let's take a look. Here we go. So Rodrigo will paste the link of this in the comments, but these are the supported extensions. So there's quite a few. Yeah, we cover most of what's common in the translation world. And we also list what we don't support, like old Office files without the X we don't support. We don't support, for instance, uneditable images like GIF and JPEGs. INDD files need to be converted into IDML and so on. But there's there's quite a bit of files that we do support.
By the way, I just want to say that I gave it a try using the WX for a while, and I think it's worked really well. I had been trying for English to Vietnamese translation only, and it works really well. Thanks.
Oh, thank you. That's great to hear from you. I really appreciate the feedback.
Okay, excellent. Let's see whether there are other questions coming in. So apart the translation smells and all the other wonderful features, Gabriel, what's your roadmap for the future? Can you give us a sneak preview of what you guys are going to do next year, or
yeah, I'd love to know.
Tell us a little bit, but
I'd love to know.
Okay.
No, to be honest, like I think we have a very clear direction of what we're doing and what we're going. So, but in my opinion, and again, I don't think there's maybe I'm just not appreciative enough of what we're doing. That could be a possibility, but in my opinion, it's really not as let's say, I don't think there's anything particularly groundbreaking in like the ideas that we're implementing. I think that it comes down to subtlety, right? It's how natural does it feel for the translator, and how well does it learn? And that's what, for us, it's a continuous lab, right? We're learning from the results, we're learning from the feedback, we're learning from absolutely everything, so that we can produce a good experience, right? So and because this is also new, we're always making like these little tweaks, right? So for instance, this year we introduced the fixed tags possibility, which is really cool. You can work with the same technology in video translation as well. And then just as an example, right, SRT files, they segment very differently typically because of how speech patterns get broken up, right? And when we're realizing, okay, the AI isn't as powerful when you have broken sentences, but at the same time, it's super easy to, in the background, join the sentences and make sense of them. So these are simple, like small improvements that make a really, really big difference as far as the ultimate results that's performed. And that's what we're always looking at. It's like the way we see it, like the way we built the platform has always been on the idea of incremental improvements over solving real world problems. And that is our roadmap. It's like the more problems we solve, the better the tool becomes. And we just try to focus on things that are the biggest impact at any given moment. And because we're learning so much, we've been actually making our roadmap more and more dynamic. You know, a good example is this learn terms thing. It wasn't at our roadmap at the beginning of the year, but A, we didn't even realize that was a possibility, but B, we realized, oh my God, it's like, you know, like my experience working with our tool was like, okay, this is great, but I'm having a lot of work adding terms to the glossary. And it's like, that's such a painful experience for a translator. Even agencies and enterprise clients, like maintaining glossaries, oh my God, it's like nearly impossible, right? It's like, what do you do? Do you pay people to continuously add terms to glossary? Do you have a terminology team? Like what is, and then we're like, oh no, we can have a glossary that's continuously fed. And then you just have to run some maintenance and see if you want to upgrade these learn terms to full-fledged terms and so on. You know, just as an example, if I confirm, right now I have tech as a learn term. Let's confirm the segment here and see what happens. Now, if I go back to it, I'll have, yeah, that was the only term that was, but sometimes there are more terms that are learned continuously. And let me see if I can find a good example of something that I think is going to be, oh, I know what's going on. Let's see. Here we go. Let's find a bigger sense here. Right now, I don't have any learned terms. Let's confirm the segment, go back. So anyway, if you can like continuously generate these learning, here, perfect. So it learned all these terms just from committing that segment, right? It's like crazy. All of a sudden I fed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 terms to the glossary with a single commit. And I mean, you don't have to look very deeply into it to know that it's making good decisions. You know, it's not translating API, CLI, webhooks. It's like making good decisions and perfectly aligned. So that's super powerful and very useful. And it became a part of our roadmap because we were like, okay, it's painful to continuously add terms. I think we have a solution. Let's do it. And that's really how we try to do things. It's really, you know, what's the nature of the problem that we're trying to solve? Can we solve it? Is it going to be relevant? Is it going to be useful? And the beauty of it is like we really feel like we are at the it's like riding a wave, right? We're trying to be at the cutting edge, which means that we have very little visibility even over what the opportunities and the challenges are. So I mentioned this at the beginning of our talk, but one of the key challenges that we're working on is how do you assess effort? And like I said, I would love to have good answers. I have ideas, but nothing I could say, no, this is the answer. This is what we're going to do, because it's hard. You know, it's like, what happens? Maybe I take 5 minutes on the same segment that you took 30 seconds, and your translation is actually better than mine. And should I get paid for my 5 minutes? Should you get paid for the excellence in your translation? Should you get, it's like, should you get penalized for being fast? It's like, how do you find a mechanism that takes everything into consideration, right? So that's something that's very much in our minds as far as how and where we're taking our tech.
Okay, thank you. We have a couple of few questions. So Dragos was asking whether you guys have an academic program, partnership program that
we do
allow students, and Rodriguez already put the link for everyone to see if there are other academics who are interested in having the students get their hands very dirty with this tool. I think it's great, actually. Let's see, Anan had another question. Have you published any research papers concerning your platform?
Not formal research papers. No, I don't think we've published many, especially because it's all so new and we've been so focused on actually delivering results as opposed to mapping them out. But I'm very interested in generating more formal research. You know, very interesting. We just recently polled, obviously not as a formal research process, but we informally polled 200,000 segments in over 40 languages. And we're seeing already like 60% of the segments being confirmed without any changes from translators. And again, this tends to increase over time when you produce greater and greater alignments between translator and engine. And that's crazy, right? It's like, that's a lot of segments that are good enough to be, and again, without translators thinking that they're working in a post-editing framework where they can only change things if it's absolutely wrong. It's like, no, these are translators working on trying to make the text theirs, right? And then even of the remaining 40%, we're seeing the vast majority, like over 80% of those segments are getting maybe 1 or 2 changes per segment. So, you know, very few sentences require rewriting, but still, like, you know, you were pointing out, Isabella, it's like, because it's a tool, and then again, going back to Rodrigo's social media metaphor, it's like, there's so much more responsibility and burden on the user, right? Because if I'm a user and I like reject all the feeds and I just start typing from scratch, I'm not going to get any benefits. And that's one situation. You know, if I'm able to teach it well and I'm conscious about my choices and the impact of my choices, and consistent about how I store, like a good example is like, we were seeing Anan say, for instance, about the glossaries, right? And let's say if I start creating bad knowledge architecture and like I create a glossary, and in the same glossary I have contradictory styles like informal, informal, and all of that, the engine is going to get confused. If I'm good about managing knowledge, the engine is going to get better and better, because when I translate informally, it's going to know it's informal, and you know, if I translate formally, it's going to know it's formal. So there's a lot. I think our moment is really about trying to raise awareness. It's really about trying to show people, I love your expression, getting your hands dirty. It's really about getting out of the theoretical and trying it, experimenting with it, and seeing how powerful it can be. Because that's typically what we notice is like, as soon as someone has like a really good experience with it, then those preconceptions, like they become dulled
Yeah.
down, and it's like, okay, this is actually cool. I can have fun. I can make more. But I still think that like this is just the beginning. It's not the solution of anything. It's just going to change the nature of the problems that we have to deal
No.
with. But
Okay.
but it's fun.
And
There's
and
one final question. Yeah, Rodrigo, did you want to
I
say?
was thinking about these public memories and public glossaries, and essentially the way how I see large language models, they are a huge public translation memory, a huge glossary, and I think they are good and synthesize and get our context and summarize that, I think. So instead of you have many other sources or multiple sources bringing public glossaries, that you still have to read all of them and make sense which is the best in your context. Large language models, they have this power to bring context, like Gabriel said. And so so some way we have public glossary because we are leveraging large language models in this sense, because large language models, they probably they are consulting and they are accessing the same sources like these public glossaries, but the difference is they just bringing the important part for us. They aren't bringing noise. Sometimes yes, but essentially it's trying to filter your segment, your document context. I think that it's the way how I see. Yeah.
Yeah, right. There's one final question from Florencia, very quickly, we're at the end, but Florencia was asking, does the tool have an LQA feature?
It does. Yeah. Let me just show that
Sure,
very
very
quickly.
quickly.
Because I do think it's important to show, and it also has some AI applications as well, which can be very neat. So let me just show this right here. All right, can everybody see my screen?
Sure.
Perfect. So let me open a project that I completed a previous workflow for. Let's take a look at this one. So actually this is in Ukrainian and I don't know any Ukrainian. Let me pick up a different one. Here you go. Okay, this is in French. Okay. And let's open this. So the translation step has been completed here. Let's open this in French as an example. And I translated this with machine translation. And again, I'm not going to enable the web preview, but you can always do that. But
Sure.
when same concept, right? It's learning terms. And let's say, for instance, I start making changes here. Like, let's say, right now, I choose to translate this with AI, see if it's going to change. It did, because it was te permet, now vous permet, became more formal, and it explained exactly what the change was, which is pretty amazing. If you mark this as reviewed, and you can not only see the changes at the editor level as well, people can agree and disagree. This should have been kept. This should have been kept formal, informal, and I can disagree. And let's do this just again for just one more segment here. And let's go back here and let's apply the machine translation. Again, it's going to try to explain the change and exactly, and I can always override this again, I'm always the author, right? I can always override this. I'll mark this as reviewed. Again, I can see the changes, but the beauty is that all of this flows in to your quality module. So this is the file that we're working on. These are the 3 changes that we just made. I can see the comments. I can see that there's a conflict between translator and reviewer. I can interact with this, and this also generates data that can help with our automation as far as, because users, you can also create like all of their review and OQA data flows into their profiles. So you can, let's say, configure BWX with certain automation settings to work with people below or above a certain quality threshold, and you can create a tagging system. So anyway, like the idea of quality is very much embedded in the tool. So it's the idea of not just like not just like translating, but making good decisions on the translations.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Gabriel and Rodrigo. We're at the end of the webinar. And as I said in the beginning, we have a town hall on AI next week, December 6th. Both of you guys, I expect you to see there and join the conversation. And of course, an invitation is open to all the Gala members. I see that Anan was mentioning that they have an MA program and they're also interested in the partnership. So I think Rodrigo will probably reach out to you, Anan. Thank you so much, guys, and thank you to all attendees. And the webinar was recorded. I'll post the recording as soon as possible tomorrow at the latest. And Gabriel, we hope to see you in Valencia, maybe with a soapbox speech, something controversial, nothing less. I'm expecting.
I don't know how not to be controversial, so it's hard.
Okay. Okay, excellent. You're on then. Thank you so much, guys.
But Isabella, before we go, I just really want to thank you and thank all of our amazing audience. Love the questions, and again, we're learning just like everybody is, and we really welcome more and more people into our community, because the way we see it, like the only way forward is working together, and we want to bring everybody together.
Okay, that's very important. Thank you both, and we hope to see you soon.
All right, take care, everybody. Thank you.